Imagine you've been tracking a herd for 6 hours, following hoofprints through unfamiliar terrain, so focused on the trail that you never once looked back to check the way you came. Now the sun is dropping fast, the herd is gone, and when you finally look up, nothing around you looks familiar. No landmark, no river you recognize, no trail leading home. Just trees, hills, and shadows getting longer by the minute. Your heart starts pounding, not because of an animal, not because of another person, but because of something far more basic and far more dangerous. You don't know where you are. Today, being lost barely exists as a real problem. You pull out your phone, a blue dot shows exactly where you're standing, and within seconds you have turn-by-turn directions home. Getting lost has become almost impossible to sustain for more than a few minutes. But for most of human history, getting lost wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was one of the most common ways a person could die, quietly, alone, without ever being attacked by anything at all. So what did ancient humans actually do in that moment? How did a person with no map, no compass, and no way to call for help find their way back to a group that might be the difference between life and death?
The first thing to understand is that getting lost triggers a very specific and very dangerous psychological response. And it's one that modern search and rescue teams still study today because it hasn't changed at all in tens of thousands of years. The moment a person realizes they don't recognize their surroundings, panic sets in almost immediately. And panic makes people do exactly the wrong thing. They move faster, they change direction constantly, hoping the next hill or the next tree line will suddenly look familiar. Search and rescue researchers have a name for this pattern. They call it the woods walk, and it almost always makes things worse, because a panicked, randomly wandering person can end up traveling further from safety in an hour than they would have covered in an entire day of a rescue party's search radius. Ancient humans very likely faced this exact same instinct, and the ones who survived being lost were probably the ones who found some way to fight that instinct instead of giving into it. There's strong evidence that early humans developed an entire mental toolkit for staying oriented long before they ever got lost in the first place. And that toolkit is probably the real answer to how ancient people avoided getting fatally lost as often as you'd expect.
Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, people like the Martu of Western Australia or various Arctic Inuit communities, have documented something remarkable: an internalized, constantly updated mental map built from small environmental details most people today never even notice. The angle of sunlight, the direction moss grows on a tree trunk, the way wind consistently bends grass in a particular valley, the specific shape of a distant mountain ridge from multiple different viewpoints. These details get memorized automatically over a lifetime of moving through the same general territory, and they function almost like a built-in GPS system, one that runs constantly in the background of a person's mind without them consciously trying to use it.
This is why children in traditional hunter-gatherer societies are often given remarkable freedom to explore on their own from a surprisingly young age. It's not carelessness, it's training. Every trip out, even a short one, builds up the same kind of environmental memory that eventually makes it almost impossible for an adult in that same landscape to become truly dangerously lost. The terrain itself becomes as familiar as the inside of your own home. But even with all that internal mapping, people still did get lost, especially in unfamiliar territory during long hunts, migrations, or when weather conditions like fog or heavy snow erased every visual landmark at once. And when that happened, the record suggests humans relied on a specific, learnable set of survival behaviors, ones passed down deliberately from one generation to the next, because knowing what to do when lost was clearly considered essential knowledge, not something you were expected to figure out on your own in the moment. The very first instinct taught in almost every traditional survival tradition studied by anthropologists is the opposite of what panic tells you to do. Stop moving. Sit down. Stay in one place. This single behavior alone dramatically increases survival odds because it stops the person from wandering further outside any search radius their group might use to find them, and it conserves the energy and water that random wandering burns through fast.
The next step was almost always finding water, because water sources aren't random, they follow predictable patterns. Water flows downhill. Rivers eventually connect to larger rivers. Larger rivers eventually lead to places humans actually live, because every human settlement in history depended on being near reliable water. So a lost person moving downhill, following any trickle of water they could find, was following a strategy with real logic behind it, not just wandering hopefully. This single piece of knowledge, water leads to people, may be one of the oldest pieces of practical survival wisdom ever passed down, precisely because it worked reliably across almost any terrain on Earth. Shelter came next, and specifically, shelter built to be visible, not hidden. This is a detail that surprises a lot of people, because instinct tells you to find cover, to feel safe and enclosed. But ancient survival knowledge, echoed today in modern wilderness safety training, emphasizes the opposite, building something visible from a distance, a distinct shape, a cleared space, something that stands out against the natural landscape. Because a lost person's job isn't just to survive the night, it's to be findable by the people searching for them. And that search itself wasn't left to chance either.
Groups almost certainly develop systematic ways of looking for missing members, and there's compelling indirect evidence for this in the behavior of modern hunter-gatherer societies, where a missing person triggers an immediate, coordinated, and surprisingly methodical response. People spreading out in known directions, checking known water sources first, calling out in patterns loud and rhythmic enough to carry over long distances, and be recognized specifically as a human distress call rather than random noise. Fire played a role here too, obviously for warmth, but also as one of the earliest long-distance signaling tools humans ever developed. Smoke rising from a specific location during daylight, or flame visible at night from a significant distance, turned a lost individual from an invisible needle in an enormous landscape into a fixed, locatable point that a search party could actually navigate toward.
So, when you put all of this together, ancient humans getting lost in the wild wasn't really about wandering helplessly until luck intervened. It was a situation governed by real, transmittable knowledge. Fight the panic, stop moving, find water, make yourself visible instead of hidden, and trust that the group's search behavior was as systematic as your own survival behavior needed to be. Getting lost was terrifying, and it absolutely did kill people throughout human history. But it wasn't a random death sentence either. It was a problem with a known set of solutions, quietly passed from parent to child, generation after generation, long before anyone needed a map to know exactly where they stood.